All right, guys, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith. Guys, this is the last conversation before Christmas. And we've been embarking over the last several weeks in the Advent series, The Foundations of Belonging. And we've been going through various states of feeling this sense of belonging, various states of relationship, belonging to God, feeling like you belong with others, and then being at peace with yourself. And so we are in the week, right, that it seems like everything kind of comes to a fever pitch this week in a lot of regards. Mm-hmm. And
people start wearing Christmas sweaters in random places.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And so, I think this morning and today, whenever you're watching this, it's there needs to be an opportunity to take a step back from the noise and the chaos. Understand that, yeah, there's a lot of beauty to be had coming up within this week. If you do the whole family thing, you do the whole friends thing, you do the whole get together thing, traveling, whatever. It's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of good things that can happen during this season. But taking a step back to really focus on what matters most in all of this, and I mean, cue the cheesy Christmas conversation here, but I do think there is something to when you're looking at these foundations of belonging, and we kind of touched on some of this in the in this morning's stream, that we really, when we're investigating ourselves, getting to know ourselves, when we are investigating and getting to know others and the parameters of relationship and navigating those things, we can't fully do that without Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of side conversations that can be had about December 25th and Jesus and the Nativity and all of those kinds of things. But we acknowledge on that day that God is a God that keeps his promises.
Yeah.
And that the only reason that we get to look at any of these paradigms of belonging, and the only reason why we really get to immerse ourselves in real joy and real celebration and all of those kinds of things during this time as Christians is because God kept his promises.
Yeah.
And we can look to that with hope and confidence.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's something that is worth talking about again, and that is that God is, his purpose is restoration. And really, when we've talked about this foundations of belonging as this Advent series, I had a conversation with somebody at the church on Sunday after the service, and she said, you mentioned, or Scott mentioned, how it seemed like an odd Advent series. It seemed like an odd Christmas series to talk about belonging. But she said, why? She said, this is what Christmas is all about.
Yeah.
This is the perfect Advent Christmas series. This is exactly what it's about. And it got me thinking that the reason Christ came was to restore us. And when we've talked about belonging, we've talked about the restoration of our place with God, that we were meant to be with him, that was the place we belonged, was in unity with him, and that was broken. And we can't get back to that place of belonging without Jesus. We talked about the community of faith and how we belong with one another, and it's not our preferences, it's not our the things we're angry about, it's not these little tribes that bring us together. It is Jesus that brings us together as a community of faith. So we don't gather around a political cause, we gather around Jesus.
Right.
And if you're gathering around anything else, then you're not a church, you're a club.
Right.
So we gather around Jesus. So our belonging in a community of faith and with each other, it's the restoration of that relationship, those interpersonal relationships that need Jesus. And then this sense of peace with ourselves. Without Jesus, we wouldn't be able to come to this peace, to recognize that we are the image of God, to have that image of God restored through the work of Christ. So in all three of the areas that we've talked about, in belonging, whether it's belonging with God, belonging in a community of faith with each other, or belonging with ourselves and being at peace with ourselves, all three of those depend upon Christ and depend upon the restoration of the original design that he came to bring.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's the promise of God, was to restore.
Yeah. Yeah. That you can see the shades of that even from Genesis.
Yes.
And that's
why we kept going back to Genesis for this series.
Right, exactly. And you illustrated through the lens of the biblical canon, specifically from Genesis through to what it looks like as you go through the Old Testament and then Jesus, that we were created with a purpose, that we were created intentionally, and that we were given dominion and all of those things, and that man chose to separate their will from God's will. And then we proceed to see how that can spiral down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah.
And the whole time, from Genesis on through different prophetic figures in the Old Testament, these glimpses of hope that say, hey, it's gonna get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, yeah.
this is you're going to continue tumbling down the rabbit hole. But there is hope of restoration. There is a light that's coming, and all of those things. And then Jesus comes. And when we conceive of the Advent season, it's funny because I wasn't a part of that conversation that you were referencing, but I myself have kind of taken a step back and being involved in the rough cuts and being involved in the pre-planning meeting and kind of knowing what was coming.
Yeah.
I've thought through, how does this fit into Christmas? And then I took a look at where my wife and I are. So we elected not to do a Christmas tree and all of that. And just understanding that right now in our house, we are in a time of mourning. And those that we love are in a time of mourning right now. And we've had plenty of conversations about not getting lost in the morning and all of those things, but it's given the opportunity to pause on the hope that is within this period of time, even with its associations, even with its cliche and cheesy stuff and all of these things, all of the stuff that comes along with Christmas, we can still point to the fact that we get to have these conversations. We get to, and I'll even say for myself, just I guess taking the opportunity to really be transparent about this. The reason why I've had a chance to console people that I love on the level that I have, to be able to pull forward the theology of hope, is because of Jesus and what he came for, and the promises of God, and how that binds together this existence and gives us a navigation point, even when what we're navigating seems like hell.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Is some of the hardest things that the human death and grief and hardship and all of those things are just, they look different in different circumstances and situations. But I mean, spend 30 seconds and think about it. It's some of the hardest stuff that the human experience and the human person will endure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so getting a chance to point back to Jesus, and all the while getting a chance to, with a body of believers, walk through the bits and pieces, the puzzle pieces, the layers of, this is where we derive our sense of belonging. For as much as I looked at this series and was like, man, that's going to be good for some folks that wrestle with this season. I probably should have had the foresight to say that me and my house would be in that group.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily realize how close to home all of that was going to get. And so I bring up all of that to state that that's just one flavor, 52 flavors, whatever. But that's just one flavor of the fact that it is so vitally important to go back to this hinge point of restoration, because that's where everything else starts to fit into the puzzle. That's the linchpin that the rest of these things hover around.
Yeah. If you don't have that, then what are you basing your hope on?
Right.
That's what I keep. I'm the same way. I was like, this belonging. I really like these. I like these kind of abstract, conceptual series, but I wasn't thinking about how much it would impact me.
Yeah.
And I should. I've been doing this long enough. I should know that if it's not going to impact me, then it's not worth it. I'm not really getting into it as deeply as I should if it's not impacting me as well.
Right.
And so that's I needed to get my head around what is this really telling us?
Yeah.
Like, sure, everyone needs a place to belong. That's kind of the feeling, that's the emotional connecting point, is we all inherently have that need to belong somewhere.
Yeah.
And even if we feel like we don't belong, that becomes its own little safety net for ourselves, as I don't belong anywhere, and therefore I'm safe not belonging.
Yeah.
But it is. I'm responding to what you said as I feel the same way, that I've gotten so much out of this because I didn't think about the restoration part until we got into it. And that is that is where the hope lies. Like when we look around at the world today, we see all the brokenness. We see all the damage that's done. We see whether it's personally or the people that we know or the world at large, we don't have to look too far to see the damage that is constantly being done and the darkness that's constantly being spread around the world. And I think that the fear that we carry is this is all there is. Like, and that drives us, that fear drives us to take control. There's broken things, there's damage being done. I have to be in control of this now. I have to take the reins. If I don't take the reins, more damage will happen without ever, like we talk about that self-examination, without ever examining ourselves deeply enough to go, oh, maybe me having the reins is the problem. So it's this constant like grasping for control and then recognizing that my control breaks things as well. And it can get very hopeless. You can, especially in the face of grief, that's when it feels most palpable. Because you can't do anything about it. So the hope that we have is not just this nebulous, we have hope in Jesus, and that should just saying that should be enough. It's usually not. It's usually not enough to just go, we have hope in Jesus, there you go. That's a catch-all cliche kind of thing to say. What is the hope that we have in Jesus? Well, what I've come to embrace is that all of this will be done away with. Not destroyed, not up in a ball of smoke, but all the evil, all the darkness, all the pain, it will be gone because that's what restoration means. It means that everything gets to be made new again.
And for me, part of that also includes like yes to everything that you said, but when I look at the realities of the human experience, part of that self-awareness is just being keenly understanding of the fact that if left to my own human devices, I know how I would respond to some people and some circumstances. And to see what has spun out relationally as a result of embracing God in all of this, all of the chaos, all of the pain, all of the emotions, and choosing love as an action word rather than my own human instincts. The byproduct of that is such a beacon to me for the hope of restoration, because I understand the limitations of myself. You know, who I'm capable of loving, what I'm capable of accomplishing, how I'm capable of regulating emotions as it regards to specific things. When I look at even just I don't even need to go much further than the last month. And just to see the strengthening of the relational bonds that has taken place in the midst of heartbreak, in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of walking through hell together, that is, as cliche as it sounds, that's a God thing. And that, it's almost like there are aspects and components of the various topics of conversation that have been live and in living color for me in very real time as we've been talking about it, as we've been going through these things and all of that. And it's been interesting for me being in this position of pastoring others, but also pastoring family during this, and also being aware of my own soul and where I'm at and all of those kinds of things. That, I mean, this is why I go back to, we can't get lost in the falsehood that what we're talking about is wholesale. Oh, everything is sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're gonna be happy just because we've said that Jesus is our hope. Don't get me wrong. Every single solitary bit of hope that I have, and I mean this from the very, very depths of my soul and the very essence of my being, the only hope that I can pull from at this current moment in time is Jesus. That being said, underswelling in the ridiculousness of the sweater and underswelling in the present disposition that you guys see is a lot of emotion. I have allowed myself to feel in real time more than I normally would, and I'll figure out after the fact the virtues of whether or not that was a good idea. But again, to go back to Advent, it's so fascinating that during this time, this should be the time that we're pointing to the most on the kept promise, on the lineage of hope that we can point to for time immemorial and all of those things. But it's simultaneously so easy to miss all of that because of the noise, because of the chaos, and those feelings that get drummed up as a result of the noise and the chaos and getting lost there versus embracing anything outside of that.
Yeah. And I think that's why there's so much, as joyous and as wonderful as this season tends to be for some people, there's almost the opposite end of the spectrum where people disappear around Christmas.
Yep.
Where it's like the pain that they've held off all year long is more palpable at Christmas. And there's probably several reasons for that, but it's in that allowing themselves to feel thing. It's in that recognizing that that this stuff that's been churning internally, it's getting jostled loose at this time of year in this season. And I do believe that it's difficult for people because they've not necessarily, they've not paid attention to that pain until now.
Humans have an uncanny ability to be able to compartmentalize. I even look at my own life and say, as a defense mechanism, I know that there are some things coming down the road that right now I cannot fully address or dig into because there's so many other things going on. There's so much more on my plate. I need to be present in the present circumstances, and I'll deal with this other stuff afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Does afterwards ever come?
It has to, I think, if
it
you're
does,
if because I'm not. So this is where I think that this can be a topic of conversation of, when we talk about this, how we deal with that pain and those hurts and those subjects and all of those kinds of things. It can become easy to say compartmentalization is bad. Especially when you start talking about it in terms of, like you said, some of those feelings of rejection, of square peg and round hole, of I don't have anybody around me, all of those kinds of things. We just bottle it up and bottle it up and bottle it up, and then the Christmas of it all has a way of shining a light exactly there, and so people retreat.
Yeah.
And so it can become easy to say, okay, well, then just don't do that practice. But if you understand how to take things in bite-sized chunks and put this away for a certain point with the idea it's coming back out, it's not going to stay in the box forever. And it never does, even if we are trying to keep it in the box. That we can still operate with a sense of compartmentalization at times, even, and still be able to operate functionally.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah. Well, you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, life is so filled with garbage hitting us constantly. You have to be able to compartmentalize. You have to be able to get through the day and fulfill your responsibilities and be the husband or the parent or the partner, whatever you need to be for other people.
Yeah.
That depends upon compartmentalization. The issue, of course, as you know, is emotions have to go somewhere.
Yep.
So I think you can compartmentalize the situation and say, I'm not going to process this right now. I'm going to wrap that up, put it on the shelf. But the emotions are there. And maybe you're better at this than I am. I have a hard time compartmentalizing emotional responses.
Right.
So if something happens to me and it's painful, I can put that situation away and not process it, but the pain's still there. It's like a splinter, and I take that pain home with me, and I go, that's where the emotions are always underneath the surface type of thing. I could watch a show, and there's a particularly poignant moment in the show that would not have caused a emotional response from me, but it does, because there's this pain that I've just put on a shelf and never processed. So yeah, compartmentalization is essential for us to get through the day, to get through the weeks.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that the emotional response goes on the shelf with the situation. The emotional response stays in our bodies. It stays in our souls. It's there and it stacks up. And so I think the problem then with compartmentalizing is you have these stacks of emotion that are just there hanging out. And because we didn't process the situation and put this, say, here's what happened, here's the emotion, why do I feel this way, what's going on, Holy Spirit, help me figure this out, what's this connected to? At those times, those are the times we can process it well. If we separate the situation and the processing from the emotion's still there, it just stays.
Yeah.
And I think that's like what we're talking about coming into Advent. It's like those stacks of emotions, they're there.
Yeah.
Like that, even if you've gotten through the rest of the year, maybe you haven't processed the situation, you haven't processed what you needed to, you compartmentalize. We still hit this time of year and go, oh my goodness, there's just layers and layers unresolved emotional baggage that's happening. And I think, too, one of the reasons this time of year becomes difficult is because it's, we love new beginnings. Like that's innate within us is new year, new me,
Yep.
new resolutions or whatever. And I think Christmas often represents this end point to the year.
Yeah.
And in some ways it kind of like, it can remind us of all that we've lost throughout the year. It can remind us of the things that we wished we had gotten done through the year. It can remind us of good things that have happened that we can celebrate. But whatever it is, we come to Christmas, we come to this season of this holiday, and we're like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, time to take stock.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to start the new year with this.
Right.
Or whatever. There's a whole lot of variables in that.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's, if you guys notice, we are using terms like season, Advent season, different things like that. It's not a matter of December 25th
Yeah.
being the end all be all of what it is that we're talking about. This season extends for really months on the back nine of this of the calendar year, and then really once you hit December 1 is where a lot of times for a lot of folks it really ratchets up. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a very present reality to what you're talking about when trying to thread the needle of compartmentalizing when you consider the emotions. Because there is a very fine line between almost like turning the faucet on part way when it comes to the emotion. Like you're not actually dealing with the full breadth of the decision, the situation, the circumstance. But you're also not trying to cut out those emotions and pretend like they don't exist.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, if we aren't aware enough to know when the faucet's off entirely or when the faucet's dripping.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's why I think it is so important to pull some of these questions that get brought up around Christmas forward into January and forward of how well do you know Jesus? How well do you know yourself? What does that relationship between you and God look like? And all of those kinds of things. Because when you start to investigate, it's hard, it's difficult, it is painful, because it will conflict with the human, it will conflict with the self. But those are the moments where you are able to embrace the relational components that lead to embracing the realities of restoration. And that's when you really can look at the world around you and say, there is a storm on all sides of me. But I know that in the boat, I am safe. That doesn't come from the self.
Yeah.
That only comes from Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So when we talk about Advent, there's there's no expectation when navigating all of this that you're going to have the holiday spirit.
Yeah.
Or anything like that, but also I want you guys to understand, he may be in a plain hoodie, but he's got one of these, and we all know it. He walks around in Christmas sweaters off camera all the time.
All the time.
Not even during just Christmas.
All year long, really.
Yeah. But there's no expectation to then suddenly be hyper into Christmas from a commercial standpoint or that sort of thing. Just because you are addressing some of these things, just because you are embracing some of these things, and all of that. It's not I think sometimes when we talk about these things, there's an expectation of falling one way or the other. Likewise, we've been sitting here talking about this from the perspective of folks that may be struggling, and I would say to anybody who's going to have an awesome family experience over the next week and all of that, awesome, phenomenal. Like that is a wonderful thing if you are going to be able
Celebrate
to spend
it.
time. Yeah, absolutely. If you're going to be able to spend time with family and friends and engaged with loved ones in the whole 9 yards, then phenomenal. Still, I would say the exact same thing about focusing on the most important pieces of why this time matters. Because even without that, even with all the love and the good times and the cheer and all of that kind of stuff, we can still get lost in the stuff of it all, in the doing of it all, in the events of it all. You know what I mean? Even if it doesn't come out of a place of trauma, we can still be distracted from what matters most.
Yeah, because I know it's an old conversation that's been going on since Charlie Brown, but it's because the commercialism that surrounds Christmas, we're so good at it.
Yeah.
It's like the number one American export is commercialism.
Yep.
We can take anything and make money off of it, and we've take this tradition of hope, this tradition of anticipation, this tradition of recognizing what Christ has come to do, and then just shift it, just distract us enough to not really worry about Jesus, to not really think about all of the spiritual elements that have come together in Advent, in the Advent of Christ.
Yep.
And turn it into something that you don't really have to deal with that. Just, my goodness, just go have some eggnog.
Yeah.
Just go celebrate.
Yeah.
Put some lights up, walk around, just get caught, like the whole getting caught up in the magic of the season. At the risk of being Grinch-like, I just can't stand that part of it.
Yeah.
Because it's an attempt to replace what really happened. It's like, not to say it was magic, but there was a supernatural event at Christmas.
Yep.
The supernatural event that God came as a child and was born in this world, and grew up in this world, to demonstrate what it looks like to be fully human and to be divine at the same time. That was an incredible. You want to get caught up in the magic of a season?
Yep.
My goodness, think about that. You can't even process that.
Yeah.
But we've attempted to replace it with pretty lights and pretty things.
Right.
And put a bow on it and make sure you feel better and make sure you get yourself together, at least for this time of year, because everyone expects you to celebrate.
Yeah.
But so to not get distracted by that, to not get pulled into the cheap magic that Christmas offers, but to turn around and go, this historical supernatural event that occurred in Bethlehem on Christmas night, that is more incredible, more amazing, more magical than anything else that we can come up with.
Yeah. And I think likewise, we can set ourselves up for, okay, now is the time where we do process some of this stuff, and now we're going to start making our lists of this is what I want to change about myself, this is what I want to change about myself, this is what I want to change about myself, as we head into the new year and New Year's resolutions and all of those kinds of things. And, you know, there are aspects of us that, yes, need to change and grow and transform. There is the Bible speaks to the renewing of the mind, right? The sanctification of the individual, becoming more Christ-like. There's nothing wrong with growth and transformation, but attaching that to a calendar year or a date on a calendar or a period of time like that, that's where it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
Because we set these standards for ourselves that are typically based off of commercialism and all of that, and we or what other people think of us versus and drawing our identity out of that versus drawing our identity out of God. And we start to circle into this. I need to now is the time for me to address these things, and I'm on a time crunch where when I look back over the next year, once this next year is done, I need to be at this particular point and things like that. And yeah, that's not how the human experience works at all. Sure, if you can have a goal that you can set benchmarks to and all of that kind of stuff, okay. Generally, though, that's not those aren't the types of goals that have anything to do with the spiritual or the emotional or anything like that. And so I would counsel that while we are encouraging this idea of allow yourself to be present with God during this time, likewise, don't fall into the trap of, oh, I am present with God, so he is going to pull out every single thing that's wrong with me, I'm going to pull that into a list, and now these are all of the things that I have a year to tackle, and then otherwise I'm just going to get discouraged again.
Yeah, because I think that just puts God in as your therapist.
Yep.
Like that's an incorrect view of God that we can fall into. And it's easy to fall into that, especially as we've been talking about examining yourself, understanding that it's the Holy Spirit that changes you. And so you can easily go into this, well, yeah, this is the list of things I want God to change.
Yep.
So kind of like it's a better track than this is a list of things I'm going to change.
Yep.
But it then places this expectation on, it's the same legalistic type of mindset that we see all over the place in many different forms. If I do this, God has to do this.
Yep.
If I do this, God will bless me. If I do this, God will fix this. So we don't do that with any other, well, we shouldn't do that with any other relationship. If we view other relationships in that way, that's a dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah.
So we want to have relationship with God, and it is in that relationship that change happens, but it's not, if I do this, then God will change this.
Right. So going forward, as you head into this week and throughout the rest of this Christmas season, guys, we really do want to take the opportunity to say, embrace the togetherness that you can experience. There is something wonderful about a healthy coming together of a group of people and this can be a time where that happens. And so, absolutely, embrace and celebrate in all of those kinds of things. For those that are navigating this season keenly aware of feeling a lack of a sense of those things, or feeling pains or heartaches in themselves, or different things like that, and wherever you fall in all of that paradigm, because it's kind of hard to put a specific pin in any one spot, because you look at a bunch of different people and you're going to get a whole variety
Every different
of
answer.
different permutations of what exactly that looks like. So whatever that does look like for you, what we're talking about remains the same. Focusing on Jesus, focusing on your identity in God and what that dictates about you, and the worth that you have in God, and the beauty of creation, and all of those kinds of things, in a time where, all of those things can be very easily called into question. Focusing on that and putting your stake down in the hope that comes from restoration is, I'll speak for you here, our prayer for you this holiday season.
Absolutely.
So, guys, this is it before before Christmas, and so we want to take the opportunity to say Merry Christmas. For those of you that are in person within the Grove community, we will have services on the 24th at our usual time of 10 o'clock, and then also at 5 o'clock.
5:30.
5:30. As well. And so that's not going to look like a typical service.
No, it'll be more like our Good Friday service, where it's a little more heavily music oriented with scripture readings. Scott will speak for a short amount of time, we think.
Short in relation to Scott.
Yeah.
And so for those of you that are not that are not in person within their community, you'll be able to find the Christmas Eve service all the same as the others. You can tune in here on the YouTube channel. You'll be able to find that on the website, discoverthegrove.com, as well as Facebook as well. And then, as always, if you have questions about anything that we bring up here on Rough Cut, or anything from the sermons or anything else like that, we have the Q&R time in person, and then you can go ahead and leave a comment or shoot us a message, and we'll be more than happy to engage with you there. But until next time, guys, have a safe and happy Christmas, and we'll catch you next time.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.